Welcome to our first monthly AAPI Pastors Gathering hosted by Catalyst Wellness Alliance. My name is DJ Chuang, the Executive Director of Catalyst Wellness Alliance, or CWA. Our vision is to empower AAPI thriving, especially in mental health. CWA is building and hosting a nationwide community for pastors, counselors, researchers, denominations, and nonprofits to share resources, learnings, and opportunities so that we can work better together and help more people experience hope and healing. And this gathering is history in the making. It is our first of a monthly gathering to have a safe place for pastors to engage in mental health. We believe pastors are pivotal, a catalyst in the process of bringing mental health to a community. And as the importance of spirituality and mental health is becoming more widely accepted, our goal is for these gatherings to connect pastors and their churches with how mental health ministry will serve their staff, church, and community. Let me introduce our special guests. Pastor Dave Kim is the lead pastor shepherding the Garden Church in Chatsworth, California, in the northwest suburbs of Los Angeles. He's author of 2 books, Poems in the Pandemic and Greater Things. I'm very grateful for his friendship over a decade and his partnership as we've launched a mental health ministry together at the Garden Church in just 2 months. After David shares his personal mental health journey, he'll be followed by Dr. Russell Jung, a sociology professor in Asian American Studies at San Francisco State University. He's the author of 5 books, Faithful Generations, Sustaining Faith Traditions at Home and Exile, Mountain Movers, and Family Sacrifices. Russell's one of the 3 co-founders of the nonprofit coalition Stop AAPI Hate, dedicated to ending racism and discrimination against Asian American and Pacific Islanders. And for this effort, Russell was named in Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People for 2021. Thank you, David and Russell, for blessing us with your presence. And first up is David.
It's great to be here. Thank you, DJ, for inviting me to this conversation about mental health. And so I'll just dive right into my journey. I am the pastor of the Garden Church. My wife, Sharon, and I, we planted the church in 1995. So we just out of seminary, and I have been pastoring the same church. We've been pastoring the same church for 29 years. We'll be celebrating 29 years. And for most of my adult life, I have struggled with clinical depression that was not diagnosed until in 2007. So right when our church started, I think we were, I know we were too young when we started the church. So incredible pressure at 25 to be a senior pastor. And it was just, I went into depression pretty quickly, I think within the first year. And it was immobilizing, many months. I think the first one was up to 6 months. And I barely functioned. It was by God's grace. It was really hard on my wife. She was a pastor. She was really caring so much when I was depressed. And I had a lot of shame around it. So I didn't want to get help. I had that, theology that, you just have to have more faith. And so had a lot of shame. So I didn't share. And by God's grace, I was able to get out of, not get out, just get a little better and then be functional. And then it happened again. So it happened several times. And it was really rough because nobody knew, just me and my wife. I had a good friend that also was in ministry that also struggled with depression. He was a missionary. He kept encouraging me to go get help, get medication, but I continually refused until I really hit a bottom, and that was 2007. And my mother suddenly passed away at 66. She died within 3 weeks of her cancer diagnosis. And I was just at the end of my rope. I wasn't suicidal, but I definitely thought I would need to quit ministry. And at that point, I decided, well, I might as well just go get some help. So I saw a psychiatrist, and I was officially diagnosed with clinical depression. I got on medication, which was helpful. And then I found a counselor that was specialized with pastors, working with pastors. And so I saw her for several years, and that helped quite a bit. So I, got better. And then, as you know, there's stressors in life with church, continual stressors that come. And so, yeah, I mean, I battled with depression. I was on medication, and I was told that if you have 3 or more episodes of major depression, then you need to be on um, medication for the rest of your life, at least some kind of dose. So I really struggled with that. I had such a stigma about it, and I felt like I couldn't share with people. So it was a private journey. I did share with our board of elders. They were very supportive, but I didn't feel comfortable sharing my journey, at a public level because of shame around it. In the Asian community, shame is really big. Mental health has such a stigma, and as a pastor, I really felt just, yeah, I couldn't share. And I knew that this was a part of my journey that I would share at some point when I was ready. And I wasn't ready for a long time. I went through a major health crisis in 2016, where I had an aortic dissection and my aorta ruptured. So less than 10% survived emergency open heart surgery. Before and after that episode, I was majorly depressed, and I was about to quit, but God, came through, and I got some resources and a different counselor. So I made it through that. Um, and then it was during the pandemic that, when I saw just so many people, struggling with depression. There was a suicide, not directly connected, but that happened. Just a lot of things that were going on during the pandemic. I mean, mental health was just really at crisis mode. And I felt like the Lord told me, well, not, and the Lord told me, I didn't feel like I knew that He said, this is the time that I want you to share your story so that you can erase the shame. I know that's DJ's podcast, erasing shame around it. And, as a pastor, to be able to share authentically would really, yeah, take away some of the stigma. And so this was just last year. Last year, I felt like the Lord was calling me to share. And then at that point, by God's providence, I reconnected with DJ. And it was, yeah, God's providence. And I knew I was going to share. And then that's when we began our partnership with, I began a partnership with DJ, and who came along as a coach for us. And, this is all new to me about, how to share in the best way that will be the most helpful. And then, knowing after I share, then providing resources and really launching a whole ministry. So we assembled a team, at our church, a mental health team called Deeper Waters. DJ coached us, and I shared my story with the church. And so, the church, I've been with this church for 29 years, since its founding. So they didn't know about this part, which is such a big part of my journey. And I was very nervous, but with a lot of prayer support from DJ and from our Deeper Waters team and our board, I shared in May doing a series on growing in emotional health. It was part of that. And yeah, I was just really thankful that I had an opportunity to share. And it really, it did destigmatize the issue quite a bit. People hearing a pastor sharing openly about medication. I just didn't hide anything. I shared the shame, that I had felt for all those years, but God had really brought a lot of healing to that shame. So that's why I was able to share. And after that, DJ came and, did his testimony. I think testimonies are a big part of just opening up this matter, making it safe. When people hear testimonies, they can relate and identify. And then we also did a training for our lay leaders about mental health and just the questions, taking questions and how to refer people. We established, we got a list for counselors that we could refer to. We have some counselors in our Deeper Waters ministry that are being able to refer and talk to people. We did a seminar on anxiety, and then we'll be doing one on depression. So this all kind of happened so quick. I think we began the ministry, and now it's launched, and it's a long game. And So we're seeing people, open up and share. Our young people, our congregation members, and the conversations are happening. I think it's become a much safer. I mean, I can't say, of course, the stigma's just gone that quickly, but I believe we're making headway, and just by continually putting out, the mental health issue, I think we're going to see a lot of people get help. And yeah, people need to get help. They can't deal with it on their own, and that shame really needs to be broken. So I'm thankful to the Lord. I'm thankful to the Lord that my mental health challenge didn't take me out. In terms of the ministry, there were a lot of times where really was at the end of my rope, and God did provide resources, and now I'm glad that I could share with others just openly, to just, yeah, take away the shame, and really help Asian Americans and beyond, yeah, find health and support. And it is manageable if you get the help, you get the support. I found that. So that's my story. Yeah.
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate you being bold in faith and sharing how God's worked in your life, particularly with mental health. Next up is Dr. Russell Jung. So I'm going to switch the spotlight over to him. Thank you
Thanks,
for being
CJ.
here.
And thank you, Jen, for also organizing this. And thank you especially, Pastor David, for sharing, and appreciate your friendship and testimony. I think it means a lot for all of us to hear a leader share so openly and authentically. So, what I want to talk about today, too, is the mental health crisis that the broader Asian American community has gone through. As DJ mentioned, I founded Stop API Hate. And one of the things I noticed really early on was how traumatizing the incidents of hate were and how Asian Americans were responding. And so, to give you a sense, we receive thousands of incidents of racism. About 20% at the minimum of Asian Americans experience this type of racism. And of those, a really high percent, at least 1 out of 5, show symptoms of trauma. And these are 3 or more long-term symptoms. So, to give you a sense of the collective racial trauma that our community is going through and still, dealing with, I want to share some stories with you. I'll read this one story, and it's from a pastor. And what I'd like to do is, after you finish hearing just her an interview with her, put in the chat your emotional response. So put on your empathy hats and be ready to type in how you feel when you hear her story. So this is from Reverend Dr. Bo Young Lee, who is in Colorado. Out of nowhere, a very dirty and old white truck was slowly approaching me. The driver was saying something inaudible, but I didn't think he was talking to me, so I continued to walk. But he kept following me. He rolled down the window and said to me, "Go back to China," and started to curse commonly heard racist comments about China. And because I was in Colorado, I had no idea if he had a weapon or a gun on him at the time. I abandoned the rest of my route and made an immediate right to head back. The truck turned around and continued to follow me, and he used those racist curse words. This particular incident created such a fear in me, and I didn't feel safe to go outside of my house for several months. So this is just one case. If you could put in the chat or even speak up, how do you feel when you hear this? I see scared, disturbed, fear, anger, scared, shuddering, traumatized, angry, anger, anger. Thanks. Well, you all express trauma symptoms. Asians experience long term trauma symptoms like anger, like depression, hypervigilance and anxiety, um, and avoidance of places because of the racial trauma we've been going through during the pandemic. And reports show the need to address both the racial trauma we experienced and then just the basic pandemic trauma that we had. And so I'm sure you and many of your members, your churches could relate to the sadness, the agitation, the irritability, the numbness, the fatigue um, from the trauma of both the pandemic and the racism. And what happens, actually, let me put on, can you give me, how many of you know about trauma and are sort of aware of the definitions of what trauma is? If you could um, react with thumbs up or, so just a few of you, huh? Okay, so I'll just talk about it briefly. Um, Trauma is a threat of danger, and so people have these natural reactions to being endangered. They often go into fight or flight response. And so here you could see um, the fight and flight response of Dr. Lee. I was so scared and terrified that fear and terror later turned into frustration and uncontrollable anger within me. And that's the fight response, anger. And so fear became anger, and then anger became sadness. And then the cycle also repeated again and again. So she was isolated for months. She didn't go out. That's her flight response. Her anger was a natural fight response. And we know that what happens then is that when people get traumatized, hurt people hurt people. And what they do with that trauma, with that fear, with the reaction is that they either turn it inward and become more depressed, or they project it outward. And that leads over time to intergenerational trauma. So it's been studied that racial groups like African Americans, indigenous people, Japanese Americans who were incarcerated pass down the trauma, even epigenetically, because it's in our bodies, in our genes, in our behaviors, and it gets passed down. And so this trauma, unless we deal with it now, unless we heal now, I think the period of the pandemic is going to get passed down to the next generation of Asian Americans. In the Bible, you see a lot of fight flight responses too. If you recall, at the Garden of Gethsemane before Jesus' arrest, um, actually, while Jesus was getting arrested, Peter went into fight response immediately and cut off the ear of the servant of the high priest. And so Peter too experienced the trauma, and the heightened fear, the threat of danger. And then he also went into flight response, right? He denied Jesus 3 times, he hid, he avoided Jesus. And so he too had to deal with the trauma of seeing Jesus arrested, seeing him betrayed, and then him feeling the danger of himself being arrested as well. But I'm going to talk about three, let's see. This isn't what I wanted to say. Okay. Three responses that I think are really adaptive for the Asian American community. Even though Asian Americans have been traumatized and have reacted in anger and fear, and that we've been hurt, there have been three ways that Asians have actually been using their cultural resources, their ethnic backgrounds to be protective against trauma. So we are sort of the model minority in this way, in that we do have cultural traits that actually protect us from trauma. And that even though other groups face similar traumas, Asians actually later on demonstrate less trauma symptoms than other groups, given the same amount of trauma. So instead of fighting or fleeing, what Asians did is that we flocked. And I really like this metaphor of flocking. You could think about it, it makes so much sense. In the face of danger, Asians flocked. Flocking is another scientifically based mechanism, natural mechanism to respond to danger. And there's all these studies about the flocking mechanisms, especially of women when in threat. There's another term when women face threat, they befriend and they tend. So their levels of oxytocin increase, and they tend to gather with friends, and they tend to their children. And that again is a evolutionarily adaptive behavior by coming together for strength and making sure your children are protected. So this flocking mechanism is a pretty natural reaction, but Asians, because of our collective orientation, oftentimes it's not like we're the only group, but we tend to use this really commonly. And Dr. Lee did that too, that after a while, after her period of isolation, she decided, I'm going to start telling my stories the way Pastor David did. And then I started finding allies who would work with me, who would hike with me, who would walk with me, who actually took her shopping and helped her get out. So this flocking response is really, really necessary. Asians during the pandemic, in response to anti-Asian hate, um, flocked across the nation. We saw in Atlanta after the shootings, people coming together, vigils to mourn together. People held rallies to gain allies. People went back to Chinatown to chaperone elders. So across the nation, I really saw, because I had that big overview, Asian Americans really coming together to support themselves. And this practice of providing social support for one another has been actually now documented in at least 9 studies, have been really productive. So that Asian Americans who had a lot of social support, who went to church, actually got were less depressed and less anxious than Asian Americans who are more isolated. And I just want to pause here that this flocking mechanism was also demonstrated by Jesus. That even though when he was getting arrested, Jesus could have fled. You know how he was able to disappear into crowds. He could have fought back. He could have called down angels, like he said to Satan. But instead, Jesus flocked with us and experienced humanity, experienced suffering, experienced shame and guilt, experienced pain and betrayal, so that he could be with us in solidarity when we go through these things. So that we as humans aren't left alone, but we know that Jesus, the Good Shepherd, was flocking with us all along the way when we face pain and hardship too. And so for me, this flocking mechanism is modeled by Jesus and is really probably the foremost comfort, his presence during difficulties and sufferings and mental health issues. But that's my side note. So overall, flocking is the Asian American adaptive trauma response number 1. It's a buffer to significant stress. And just for you to know, for other communities, they like getting emotional support. They like being heard. They like talking about their problems. Asian Americans don't necessarily need that type of received social support. What's actually more important for Asians, according to the data, is having perceived emotional support. That means for Asians, just knowing that there are other people around them who care for them, that's really, really helpful. Having them talk about their problems, that's actually harder for Asian Americans and not as helpful. It's that shame thing. So just you don't need to actually do anything or talk to Asian Americans. It's just um, the acknowledgement that you're there, the physical presence, the perceived emotional support, the the check-ins are what Asian Americans really benefit from. One particular study actually found that religious attendance, going to church, really buffered Asian Americans from depression. So the more your churches could surround people, let people know that you care, checking in is really, really an adaptive trauma response. The second trauma response that Asians have that's actually really adaptive is having a redemptive orientation towards adversity. Um, a lot of times Asians deny trauma, they deny it, but that's just going into flight mode. You're putting your head in the sand, and eventually that trauma, that pain, that anger is going to come out, right? You're going to hurt someone else, you're going to hurt your. But the more adaptive response is acknowledging your trauma, acknowledging your pain, but then seeking to grow from pain. So Asian Americans actually do better than other Americans because a lot of our older Asians normalize suffering. If you come from like a traditional Asian background with Buddhism or Confucianism or Taoism, you expect suffering. Suffering is a part of life. So you're not so shocked when bad things happened. And I think that's why our elders actually do better with trauma. They've gone through it and they've accepted it, that life is hard. Younger Asian Americans who are more Americanized, they have this entitled attitude that I'm supposed to be happy all the time. So that when bad things happen, like the pandemic and anti Asian hate, they were sort of thrown off and unprepared. But those of us who can accept trauma, acknowledge it, not avoid it, not deny it, not be surprised by it, but it sort of expect it, that helped protect us. And the second thing that Asians um, who did better with adversity is that they made meaning about the pain. They sought to grow from the pain. They had a growth mindset towards the trauma. For Asian American Christians, those who ask themselves, what is God trying to teach me through this moment, through this pain, through my mental health? Those who try to understand and ask God and actually really wrestle with God, not, just spiritualize it and say, oh, God's just testing me, but really wrestle with God. Those are the Asian American Christians who actually are able to overcome a lot of the anxiety and depression and post traumatic stress trauma. So here we have, again, a bunch of studies have actually documented that Asian Americans could take a negative experience and look at it from a critical perspective. Don't blame themselves, because Asian tends to either they avoid it or they blame themselves and ask, what did I do to face racism? What did I do? How can I fit in better? They try to assimilate. But rather, Asians who, instead of blaming themselves, but really tried to wrestle with God and have a new sense of perspective, did a lot better in dealing with their trauma. So I encourage churches then to the Garden Church did, like DJ and this group is trying to do, is just to normalize mental struggles, normalize racism and trauma, normalize sin. It's just our brokenness. And the more we could acknowledge that sin creates pain and anxiety and depression, and that's part of our condition, then we could really receive Jesus's healing and hope and meaning from these difficult times. And Dr. Bo-Young Lee came to that point too. She said, whenever death happens to us, these painful life experiences, we got to remember that God created us and felt good. It's not just about us. It's against God's will that the system that God is not supporting. So Dr. Lee recognized that the racism wasn't to be blamed on Asians and for us trying to stick out, but the racism was really a part of institutional sin that needs to be changed. And the third documented response that was really helpful is to take your emotions, your anger, and transform it into action towards justice and restoration. So now, if you read a lot of these psychology books by Jenny Wong, like Permission to Come Home, or there's a bunch of more Asian American mental health books, emotions and these negative feelings are just motivations for your body. Um, the anxiety, the depression, the anger, they're just they're valid, but they're emotions to move you, to motivate you. And the more you could take these feelings and see, okay, anger is gives me the sense that something's wrong. Sadness means my situation isn't right. Anxiety means I can't control the future. You take those feelings and they move you to action, especially after you listen to God. That is really helpful. And for Dr. Bo Young Lee, she took her anger, her sense that things aren't right, and she began to host art exhibits and began to educate people and began to meet regularly. So again, this has been really documented, and we found it even those who reported to Stop AAPI Hate, just taking that action of reporting your incident really helped them improve in terms of their trauma response. So the more pastors could counsel people to really validate their feelings and say, what are these feelings telling you to do? That really helps um, move the feelings from anger and anxiety and depression into actions like forgiveness, like justice, like ministering to others. So, Dr. Bo Young Lee, her anger led to a real sense that we need to be restored and we need justice. And I think that's what happened for Peter too, is that even though he denied Jesus, even though he went into fight or flight response, even though he was traumatized, Jesus flocked with him and fed him. And 3 times he told him, um, do you love me? 3 times Jesus told him, feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. So even though Peter was traumatized, even though Peter was in pain, even though Peter denied Jesus and was shamed, Jesus restored him. And that's the kind of justice that I think we Christians are called to do. Even though we as Asian Americans have been mistreated, we too need to restore our communities and take care of the sheep. So to conclude, I think most of our communities have been traumatized. And if you're a pastor and you don't realize that your congregation has been traumatized, that it is a real pastoral issue, I really encourage you to think about this seriously of what's been happening the last couple of years. Um, and first of all, acknowledge the trauma, but then also help people grow from the trauma. And there's a concept called post traumatic growth. That trauma isn't necessarily bad, it's just what happens in life. And the question is, what do you do with the trauma? What do you do with adversity? What do you do with danger when you confront it? And just a small percentage of people get post traumatic stress disorder. Most people actually grow from traumatic incidents. And that's the notion of post traumatic growth. It's the positive change. So it's just like that redemptive orientation toward change. We can actually grow from negative experiences. We could grow by having more empathy and solidarity with those who also have been suffering, other people who've gone through depression, other people who face racism. I think maybe that's what God has been teaching me a lot about is the more we go through, the more we can then care for others who go through similar situations. Peter, too, also developed a greater sense of empathy through his trauma and through his pain. Those who go through trauma realize that they survive and they actually have a lot of strength, that they've gotten a lot of strength from God. Peter became really confident after um, Jesus's resurrection. And I think, too, a lot of people, after going through difficult circumstances, have that sense of personal strength. When you go through near life experiences, you have a lot more gratitude. And I think the early church showed that too, that they in Acts 2 came together with glad and sincere hearts after the resurrection, that they too had a new perspective on life after trauma. So I just encourage you tonight that I think a lot of our community has gone through a really traumatizing thing, and we've gone through it together. It was collective racial trauma. And unless we deal with it, we're going to be hurt people hurting each other. And the challenges and the promise and the hope is that instead of being hurt people who hurt people because of our trauma, Asians becoming more racist, Asians wanting retaliation, we become healed people who heal people. And I see that too, that God is using this moment, at least in our Asian American churches, to really recognize the mental health struggles we go through, helping heal us, and then helping us to heal others. Thanks.
Thank you, Russell. That was a powerful sharing. So glad you could be here to share with us. We have some time for question and answer, whether you'd like to address something to David or to Russell. Please click on the reaction button and raise your hand or type it in the chat window. We have an intimate group, so we have ample time for interaction. And while we're waiting for the questions to come in, I want to personally thank Jin Lee, Pastor Jin Lee in Atlanta, Georgia. He's the founder of this nonprofit initiative called Catalyst Wellness Alliance. And towards the end, I'll have him share a word as well. Yes, Milton, go ahead and unmute and ask your question or comment.
Hi, Pastor David and Russell. Thanks for sharing so much. I would imagine one big question in seeking help and assistance is, the financial part of it. Most pastors don't get paid very well, so can you provide some advice as to, how a pastor could afford, let's say, you know, um, a counselor, spiritual director, or psychologist?
Yeah, I think for me, you're right. You're absolutely right. It is expensive, right, to get counseling. My counselor, the first time I saw a counselor, a good portion was covered by insurance.
Mm, mhm,
So,
mhm.
that was helpful. But yeah, it's just kind of one of those things like, you know, it's like an investment. Like the alternative was if I didn't get that counseling, I would probably need to quit ministry.
Mm, mm,
So, it was kind of like it's like if I had a cancer or something like that, you just, make the sacrifice. And I think one of the things that um, I didn't do, but I think I could have done, and I think our church would have been supportive of covering, the cost or helping cover the cost, because really, yeah, the pastor's mental well-being is, if the pastor is not well, then that's going to influence the church. So it really is an investment in the congregation. So I think that's another avenue that I didn't pursue, but I could see um, people pursuing, and I would think that there would be a positive response. I don't know,
mm,
but getting some help, and then maybe also finding other sources, of people that are interested. I know DJ used to work with L2. Finding places that might be interested in supporting the well-being of pastors' mental health. So those are some thoughts. It's a good question.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's a real valid barrier to getting mental. Actually, maybe more than shame. There's a new survey coming out on Asian American professionals, and they said it's actually um, the cost isn't prohibitive, but they can't um, justify spending so much money on themselves for their own self care. It feels sort of, they feel guilty, like, oh, it seems like a extravagance, But
Mm.
over
Mhm.
half of the professionals surveyed actually did access professional mental health. So I think it's the idea that Asian Americans don't access mental health is sort of declining, especially among the younger generation. And a lot of the professionals got it through their workforce, like the employee assistance programs. I think just another quick suggestion is in the West, mental health is seen as an illness, so you need healing, and so you need a therapist. So it's very individualized. But from sometimes an alternative approach is like, no, it's we should do community care rather than self care, and we need to really come together like groups, right? And get that have these collective groups to help each other, just support each other. So um, I think individual counseling is really needed, but also to be a little bit more preventive, to have a lot more, have your small groups discuss it, and
Yeah, I just put in the chat window a listing of Christian counselors and spiritual directors. Some of them are willing to work on a sliding scale to help those in ministry. And at that link, catalystwa.org/resources, I'll be indexing ministries that are, I found a handful so far that are specifically um, designed to minister to pastors and provide free services and counselings, retreats, and cohorts for spiritual direction. So some other resources in addition to what we're doing here at Catalyst Wellness Alliance. That's definitely on our radar. We'd like to, in the future, provide free counseling as a part of these gatherings to really support pastors along the way. Okay, we have another question coming in from Roger. Hello, Roger. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for the leaders putting this together. My question is regarding the both and. I think as we engage with this conversation of Christianity and mental health, I am often in these conversations of an either or of are we more Americanized or are we more Asian, or for mental health, do we need more biblical theological teaching or ministries, or do we need more medication and therapy? And I'm always kind of confused. I don't have a good way to navigate kind of that almost divisive conversation. Any thoughts on how to help congregations and pastors come together?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is definitely a medical component to the mental health issue. Understanding that, I think, is really really important. I know that there's some extra, pretty conservative people that say you just need the Bible and biblical counseling, but I think my experience is having a Christian counselor, based on biblical principles, but also to really attack the or help address the medical component and the counseling component. I think it's really really helpful. So yeah, I mean that's my perspective. I know that there are some that would think it's biblical counseling and stay away from secular sources, and yeah, I don't I in my own experience I think it's kind of limited in terms of really holistic help.
yeah, I just quickly, I agree with David that I think, Roger, you said it, it's both and, right? People accept Western medicine and they use it. And so, in the same way, if we could use models from psychology and mental health, you could integrate that really well, I think, with a lot of our faith. A lot of it is like, it is sin, it is brokenness. God can heal.
Hmm.
God does deliver. And so, but we could use what we learned from science on how to treat some of these issues like trauma and depression and anxiety. So
Yeah, thank you, Roger. Big question. It's a topic for one of our upcoming gatherings for sure, because there is a wide diversity of convictions and opinions on how that lands. Okay, there's a question for David from Eric Cho. You mentioned training for your leadership. What did those tools look like?
So DJ was super, super helpful. And he came and helped lead a session for training our lay leaders. What it looked like for us, I mean, it's only introductory stuff, right? But to be able to have discussions about mental health, we had two of our counselors who are part of, they're trained professional counselors that are part of our team. They did a teaching on listening skills. And then I think the other one was, I think the lay leaders really were feeling like overwhelmed, like they have to be the ones to be the answer. And, especially in the Asian context, all that guilt to that and burden that people put on themselves. So really to be able to not feel that and to, refer people out. So, it was not, it was just an introductory, but I think just basically, referral. We talked about referral, and then we talked about listening skills, and really encouraging the leaders to not take it upon themselves, but to know that they're, and we have the team too, that if they had any questions, we can refer people to our team that will either refer them to counseling or get them some help if they need. So that's the training that we did. And DJ was really instrumental in that. So I would encourage you to talk to him and Jin too, because I this is all new to me. So I didn't know how to equip our leaders in this.
Okay, Eric gives you a thumbs up. Thank you, Dave. Okay, I have time for a couple more questions, and then we're gonna have a soft dismissal, and then just have open mic and turn off the recording so we have some free conversations and get to know each other. Hello, Elizabeth. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hi, want to say thank you so much for having me. My name is Pastor Elizabeth. I'm the senior pastor at First Pres Altadena. I gotta make this comment that this might be my first time joining a mental health conversation with mostly men here. So I'm so thankful for all of you. And I think this is much needed for our Asian American community, having men, having brothers in Christ being willing to talk about this. So thank you all so much. Honestly, I just want to say I'm so thankful to be here. My church is a historical Japanese American church, a church that it's 111 years old, and a church that actually closed down during World War II because of the camp. And then it came back. And so just that communal trauma it's like part of our narrative. And then in additional to that, myself, before I came to this church, I was at a Taiwanese church in Orange County. And that's related to, you guys might know this, with the mass shooting that happened a year and a half ago. So it's kind of like just the whole thing about trauma. I feel that it's something that's so practical. It's just like part of our narrative, in additional to the pandemic and the discrimination and everything else. So I'm really thankful for the things that we share today. And I think it's really helpful for me because I am more a person that I talk about my feelings and I like to process my feelings. But I do know, I think we share that a lot of our Asian American community, it's not so much sharing, but just being with each other. That was something new to me, and so I'm really thankful that we talked about that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Great to see you again. I've met most of you here, so there's a couple more that I hope to meet in the near future, Roy and Eric. I'm going to take this moment to just close up. Thank you, Russell and David, for sharing so powerfully and poignantly, really giving us a great start as we venture into this new chapter of how Catalyst Wellness Alliance can be a part of serving churches and pastors in this whole area of mental health. Churches and pastors are such a strategic piece of serving our community at large. And as Russell mentioned in the chat, there is a crisis when it comes to our next generation. Suicide is the leading cause of death for Asian American youth, and that's not the case with any other racial group. So it is a very serious issue, is very urgent, and we're just starting this venture. So we would love your feedback. You're going to get a brief survey after this call. This Zoom is also recorded, so you'll get a link to share this with other colleagues of yours. And we're going to ask for another, just briefly, like if there's a better date and time for us to gather together with more of you in the oncoming months, that would be fantastic. And Jen is the founder of Catalyst Wellness Alliance. I'm so grateful for how God's brought him into my life and how we can partner on this huge endeavor. Jen, would you say hello to our group and close us in prayer?
Sure. Thank you so much, David and Russell. Just overwhelmed by your gracious time and your content. Just re-energized us and me and DJ for sure. Any starting endeavor, whether it be church plant, it takes a lot of energy. And this is that kind of work. It's just out of nothing. And as we have studied, everybody's working silo in the area of mental health. And so we thought if we can help just bring everybody together, researchers, nonprofits, therapists, pastors, and our first defense that we really wanted to equip and provide help and resources is the pastors first. And so that's why we are doing it monthly. And but we do need help in many ways. Prayer for sure, time and energy. And if you guys know people that you can refer to DJ that would be wanting to team up with us and giving us guidance, we need some woman advice. So Elizabeth, if you're open, we would love to have you input and give us some guidance on that. And we want diversity of ethnicity, so we don't want all Koreans. We do want in the Pan Asian. And also, we do want different denominations. And so, hope that you can invite the next one. We picked this date because we just had to pick something, but we're open. This has to be our kind of gathering, not just DJ Mike or a Catalyst gathering. To make it successful, to reach more people, it needs to be done together. And so I just ask for your prayers, resource, time, energy. We're not asking for money yet. Hopefully, as God builds it, I think there's funders that want to support this initiative and help pastors. And so just thank you so much for Russell and David to just share. I'm just honored and thank you for helping us launch this. And thanks, DJ, for just putting a lot of work into this. I know it was a rough week for you in many sense. And so, but I'm going to close us and then there's a transition to continue. But let's pray. Gracious Father, you are so good to us. You give us these nuggets of concrete grace, and thank you for this time. It was for me just evident and confirmation to continue this work. Thank you for David and sharing his life story of his journey. It can resonate in so many ways. I thank you for equipping Dr. Russell and his depth of study and research that allowed data and input to this. And but thank you for all the individuals here represented and the lives and the leadership that they play in their role. Favor and kindness to everyone. But also, Lord, I want to ask for your special protection on this movement that's not of us, but of you, so that we can redeem and be a conduit of your good work that needs to be reached. And so we put into your hand, but let us be faithful in taking steps and steward well. Just bless, Lord, your people who are alone, without hope, and are suffering, particularly the pastors as well as the congregation member. In Christ's precious name I pray. Amen. Amen.